Okay, we're going to try this again because we started and it didn't start. So we're going to be in chapter 31 tonight, and we're going to back up to verse 43 of chapter 30, which is the conclusion of everything that we studied last week in the latter part of chapter 30, where Jacob has worked the flocks to where his flock has grown. He has the stronger herd. He has the multicolored herd. And so I won't elaborate too much on the details because we covered that last week. But basically, verse 43 says this as a result of him keeping the flock for Laban for hire and getting to keep back the multicolored ones. And the man increased exceedingly and had much cattle. And the word cattle, it should be understood as flocks because it's not talking about cows. What he kept were goats and sheep. But it says that he increased in flocks, maidservants, men servants, camels, and asses. Now, we don't know. The narrative that we read last week doesn't tell us how he would have come to acquire maidservants, men servants, camels, or asses. But that's what the text says. He has increased, he has been blessed of God, and somehow he has acquired a large substance over the course of 6 years, of which he began with nothing of his own. A single solid colored herd, and he has built a multicolored herd out of that single colored herd. So I believe it's fair to say that God was working on his behalf and that the Abrahamic blessing rested on his life. We know that that is a reality even before his birth because of the prophecy that was given over him. But let's continue into chapter 31 because we have 55 verses to go. And we're going to see that tension has built. Not everybody rejoices in God blessing you or you experiencing prosperity, as we'll see in Jacob's situation. But because of his increase and the herds growing in his favor, verse 1 tells us, and he heard the words of Laban's sons, this would be Jacob, saying, Jacob has taken away all that was our father's, and of that which our father had, he gotten all his glory. So basically the prosperity that has come to Jacob has not went unnoticed by the sons of Laban. And they are envious, and that leads them to a resentment towards Jacob that we're going to see here in the next verse flows over not only in their lives but in Laban's as well. Verse 2 says, and Jacob beheld the countenance of Laban, and behold, it was not toward him as before, or as it had been prior. So Jacob can tell by the behavior and the actions of Laban that he's not too keen on Jacob anymore either. Right? Because we've already learned this about Laban. Laban likes stuff. He likes gifts. He likes money. He likes wealth. He likes possessions. And he's quite the manipulator. And when people who manipulate others get manipulated, they don't like it too well. Now they want to have the upper hand always, and in this situation he's kind of lost out on the deal. Remember, when he agreed to allow Jacob to keep the flocks and keep back the multicolored ones, remember all the multicolored ones were removed and he started with a single colored herd. So Laban, entering into this agreement, thinks, I'm going to smoke him on this deal and I'm going to come out on top. Well, everything but that happens, and he's not very happy about it. So in response to that, Jacob sees that His sons don't like him, and that Laban's attitude towards him has changed as well. You know, there are some people in this life that are only going to like you when they can use you as a stepping stool to get to ultimately what they want. It's called people who are users and abusers of people. And clearly, Laban didn't value Jacob for who he was as a person. He didn't value him as a son-in-law, the father of his grandchildren. He valued him for what he was profiting by him, because we've seen him already admit, undoubtedly, that he acknowledged he was blessed because of Jacob. Ever since Jacob has arrived, he's been blessed. He knows that. And I think it's fair to say that Laban is not a dummy. He's pretty crafty. He's pretty smart. And he realizes what's going on. But in light of all this, verse 3 says this, "And the Lord Yahweh said to Jacob, Return unto the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you." Now, it makes sense because of the timing of all this. He's in his 90s at this point, and there's this pending prophecy of prosperity and blessing and inheritance of the land of Canaan, and he's more than 300 miles away, and he's not young. So kind of like with Abraham, you know, getting up in years, it's kind of time to get on with this promise thing. And so the Lord reminds him that it's time to return to the land of his fathers. And he assures him of this, "I will be with you." That right there means more than anything. The fact that God will be with him. Notice he doesn't promise him that everything will be easy, everything will happen the way he wants, everything will happen as expected. He assures him of one thing, and we have that same promise that's reiterated in the New Testament. He will never leave us nor forsake us. He will be with us. That is a promise that we have as God's children, because we are inheritors of the Abrahamic promise, are we not? Galatians 3 and verse 29, "If you be Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise." So this promise is ours. God will be with us. Now verse 4 says this, "And Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah." Notice the order. Remember, because this has been quite the theme throughout the past few chapters as well. The favoritism of Rachel over Leah. "And he called them to the field unto his flock." So he calls them out to where he is in the field, where the flock is. "And he said unto them, I see your father's countenance that is not toward me as before, but the God of my father has been with me." Now, what we're going to see here in the next several verses is basically Jacob talking with his wives about the need to leave, and the need to leave spontaneously and quickly. And so what we're going to see in this discussion is actually going to shed light on some details that were not recorded in what we studied last week. The duration of 6 years, what all took place during that time, interactively between Laban and Jacob. He's going to expose these things in this dialogue and in a dialogue later that he has with Laban. But he goes on to say that but the God of my father has been with me, verse 6, "And you know that with all my power I have served your father. And your father hath deceived me, and changed my wages 10 times. Now, that's the first we've heard about that, of what had taken place over the 6 years. Notice he doesn't complain about being tricked into marrying both of them. Right? That's on purpose. Because he's not going to bring anything up that would upset them or offend them towards himself. He wants to pit all the blame on Laban, so that they join him in wanting to leave with him. So he points out recent flaws in his dealings with Laban, nothing to do with the marriages, nothing to do with the fact that he has two wives, one he didn't want and one he did want, and he had to work twice as long to get the one he wanted, and he stuck with the one he didn't. But he says, you know that I have served your father with all the power that I have, and your father hath deceived me and changed my wages 10 times. Now, this could be symbolic, the number 10 times that his wages were changed, because it's a rather round number, and they will use round numbers sometimes. And we'll see that later on as we read through this. But watch what he says. Your father deceived me, and he changed my wages 10 times. But God suffered him not to hurt me or to do evil unto me. So he basically 3 times through the next few verses will say, this is how bad your father is, but here's how good God is. This is what your father done, but here's what God did. And that's what he'll do over the next few verses. Verse 8, he said, thus, the speckled, if he said thus, he tells us how he changed his wages. If he said thus, the speckled shall be your wages, then all the flocks bear speckled. And if he said thus, the ring-straked, or the striped, shall be your hire, then bear all the flocks striped. So evidently, based on what he has said, there has been a variation of the multicolored ones he's been allowed to even keep. When at the beginning, any of them that were spotted, speckled, striped, or gristled would be his. And somehow, when Laban, during this process, realized, even though he started with a solid color herd of sheep and goats, that Jacob's herds were being built with multicolored animals, evidently at some point he reeled back the reins of the inclusive of all multicolored ones to, oh, you can only have the speckled, or oh, you can only have the striped. And basically Jacob says, whatever he said I could have is what everything had. If he said your wages is just the speckled ones, that's what they brought forth. If it was just the striped ones, that's what they brought forth. And evidently he was changing and vacillating throughout this tenure of 6 years on what he could actually keep. And even despite all of the wage changing, we read back in the last of the prior chapter that he increased despite all of it. So God was truly with him, and God was in it. So, verse 9, thus God hath taken away the herds of your father and given them to me. And it came to pass at the time that the flocks conceived, that I lifted up my eyes, and I saw in a dream, and behold, the rams which leaped. The word leaped should be understood as ascended. Allah is the word, the root word here, which means to ascend, which would indicate procreation, mating. When the rams leaped upon the cattle, were ring-straked, speckled, and gristled. Gristled would be dappled looking, spotted looking. And so, verse 11, he says, and the angel of God, who is sometimes referred to as what as well? The angel of the Lord, Malach Yahweh, or Malach Elohim, Ha-Elohim. The angel of God spake unto me in a dream, saying, Jacob. And I said, here am I. And he said, lift up your eyes and see all the rams which leap upon the herd, or the flock, are ring-straked, speckled, and gristled. For I have seen all that Laban does to you. Now, undoubtedly, there's more that has been said that we don't have available, at least in this form. Another thing that I want to point out here is because of the words used here, added words, changed words from chapter 30, there are some scholars who present or propose that there is a different author or a different source who wrote chapter 30 and a different source that wrote chapter 31. I don't ascribe to that, but I believe that undoubtedly in different periods of time, there were different editors who may have updated words at different places and used a different synonymous word, but not the same word. Synonymous in meaning, but not synonymous in form. Okay? So the angel of God, or also known as the angel of the Lord, appears to him in this dream and basically draws his attention to the rams that are breeding, that are striped, speckled, and spotted. And he says, "For I have seen all that Laban does to you." Here's another thing that we can take and understand. As Abraham's seed, we're not promised an easy road, right? We're not promised that we won't be done wrong, taken advantage of, fill in the blank of the possibilities in life. So he had things that happened to him that were not right, not fair. You know, kind of getting your wages changed. You know, it's not fair. Someone who reneges on what they've agreed to, that's not fair. But did you notice what he said? The angel of God, who we know is pre-incarnate Christ, the Word, Logos. He said, "I've seen everything that's happened to you. And even though I allowed you to suffer, even though I allowed hard times, it didn't go unnoticed. Even though you might have been praying that whole time for things to change, and they didn't, it doesn't mean that I wasn't aware." Maybe the timing just wasn't right. Maybe he had some things that he needed to learn. Maybe he had character that he needed refined and developed. I can testify to this, that the most refining times in my own life have been times that were not just smooth sailing, but were hard, difficult. Because difficulty, fiery trials, refine us. They purify us. They cause us to cling to God. We always pray more. We seek God more. We cry out to God more. And even though he may not be answering our prayers right away, he's right there. As we've seen him express throughout this, the Lord was with me, the Lord was with me, and then the Lord shows up and says, "You know what? I've seen everything that's been going on. There will be a time of vindication." And that time is coming for him. So he says, "I've seen all that Laban does to you." Verse 13, watch what he says, because this is important theologically. "I am the God of Bethel." This is the angel of God, who we've also seen portrayed as the angel of Yahweh, who himself says, and we've clearly seen examples where you have both figures, Yahweh and the angel of Yahweh, appearing in the same scene, not as the same entity. Right? Have we not? We've seen that. But he says, "I am the God of Bethel." Well, when you go back to the story where he has this encounter at Bethel, who was standing at the top of the ladder? The staircase to heaven? Specifically. Let's go look. Verse 12, "And he dreamed, and behold, a ladder set up on the earth. The top of it reached to heaven. Behold, the angels of God ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord," which would be who? Yahweh, because it's in all capitals, "stood above it and said, I am Yahweh, God, Elohim, of Abraham your father, the Elohim of Isaac." And then he goes on to affirm the promise on his life. So we have clearly seen that he is doing what? Saying that he is one with Yahweh. You see that? Let's go back to our text. I want to apologize for the delays. Windows 10 has been releasing an enormous amount of updates that have almost crashed all of our computers here in the church. And it's not a deal anymore to where you can change the updates from occurring. They just force themselves to happen. And so it's really bogging down the performance of all of our equipment out there and in here. So I apologize for them and the updates. It is rather frustrating. But anyway, he has said that he is the God of Bethel. Verse 13 at the top of your screen. I am Elohim of Bethel, where you anointed the pillar and where you vowed a vow unto me. Thank you, Windows. Did y'all see that? Are we still live? All right, all of you YouTubers out there, I apologize. To be fair, we are asking a lot of the PC in all of the things that we have going on at once. But still. It's coming. All right. Okay. Verse 13. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed the pillar, where you vowed a vow unto me. Now arise, get thee out of this land, and return unto the land of your kindred. Now it has to be a really good feeling for Jacob, because, I mean, if you think about what he's been going through for this past 6 years, you know he's wanting to leave. He wanted to leave 6 years prior. So to have the Lord show up, the timing of the Lord showing up at the end of 6 years of just wage changing and just frustration, resentment from the family, I mean, just a totally unhealthy atmosphere to be in. And the Lord to show up and affirm him, you know this had to just breathe life into this situation and to his future. Verse 14. Okay, so he concludes basically his little story that he gives to his wives to persuade them, hey, let's get the heck out of Dodge. Let's go back to Canaan and let's get out of here. And watch how they respond in verse 14. It's kind of odd. And Rachel and Leah answered and said unto him, is there yet any portion or inheritance for us in our father's house? What a response, right? Jacob's probably like, oh no. But they go on to say, are we not counted of him strangers? For he hath sold us and quite devoured also our money. For all the riches which God has taken from our father, that is ours. was reading that. This is a patience test, everyone. I just had this little feeling it was about to do it again. Fortunately, for those who don't watch it, like right now with us, we can edit this stuff out. Y'all have to suffer through it. See, I told y'all that we would be facing tribulation. Aren't we spoiled? We view this as tribulation. I'm scrolling, it just ain't moving. Don't do it. All right. Let's try this again. Right before you guys got here, we had to scramble to get it up in time because it froze the whole thing up. Don't move too fast. Okay, so they answered and said unto him, Is there yet any portion or inheritance for us in our father's house? Are we not counted of him as strangers? For he hath sold us, and hath quite devoured also our money. So Jacob's like, they're on board. They're mad at him too. But watch what they say in verse 16. For all the riches which God hath taken from our father, that is ours. How is it theirs? Because Jacob has prospered despite his father's attempts to take away. And because Jacob is their husband, ultimately what's his is theirs. So basically they're saying, we should be getting something from our father anyway, and evidently he ain't going to give it to us, but God's taking it away from him anyway, and it's ours and our children's. Now then, whatsoever God hath said unto you, do. So they're on board. So what does Jacob do? Verse 17. Then Jacob rose up, set his sons and his wives upon camels. And he's like, I'm going to hurry up before they change their mind. And he carried away all his flocks and all his goods, which he had gotten, the cattle of his getting, which he had gotten, Could you say get or got one more time? Right? Reckon they're trying to add emphasis to something. Which he had gotten in Padan Aram, for to go to Isaac his father in the land of Canaan. Verse 19. And Laban went to shear his sheep. So they do this while Laban is off to shear his sheep. Now remember, he's getting all of the solid colored herds, and he still has a large number of flock. Now they didn't have wall clippers back in the day, so this would have been a very tedious and drawn out process when they went to shear their sheep. And so it's just the timing is working out great for Laban. He's got to go shear all his sheep. In the meantime, he's going to make a dash back to the land of Canaan. But watch what else is said in verse 19. And Rachel had stolen the images that were her father's. The word images here is the Hebrew word teraphim. Teraphim. And this word is only used 15 times in the Hebrew Old Testament. And it's a very much debated over word, what it means or what all it entails. But when you do a study on it, and you look at all the examples that it was used, and you look at some of the surrounding usages of similar words in the ancient Near East, Ugaritic, some of the other nationalities in the area, it appears that this term, teraphim, is a word that means like a little figurine or a small idol, presumably a carved idol of some sort, that has the appearance of some sort of deity. When you look at the usage of all of it throughout the Old Testament, the size of the image can be, as we'll see in this story, small enough to fit in a saddlebag, up to something that can be placed in a bed under covers to appear like the body, like Saul's daughter did with David as he had gone out from Saul. But it's a figurine of some sort that represents a deity. Now, what's interesting about this word, teraphim, is the root that it is taken from. Resh Pei Aleph, which is a root that is found in a word called Rephaim. Rephaim is one of the words that is used to describe the giant clan that is produced by the Watchers, that is described in detail in the book of Enoch and mentioned in particular Genesis chapter 6, when the sons of God come to the daughters of man. This union produces two names that are used in particular to describe the offspring produced: Nephilim and Rephaim. That root word has a connotation of healing. So there's a connotation of a divineness linked to divination of some sort that would give a sense of stability in health and well-being. And so to Rachel, her taking this image of this deity seems to procure her well-being and her health moving forward. We're actually going to see that it works just the opposite. Listen to me, guys. Do not find your security for your survival in anything but God. I've seen people go to the finest doctors humanity can produce and attend the funeral. There is nothing greater than God's power and God's promise. And that's what we need to trust in. I'm not saying we can't use doctors, but if our faith is in doctors, that's very shallow and shaky ground. So let's learn from this parallel. Let's learn from this lesson, because we're going to see moving forward, especially beyond today, this is going to be a rather hard lesson that is learned. Because she trusted in this image for her well-being, because she was leaving her father's house to bring healing and health. And so she stole them. Verse 20 says, and Jacob stole away unawares. That's really not a good translation. It literally says Jacob stole the heart of Laban, the Syrian or the Aramaean, in that he told him not that he fled. So Jacob just throws the wives up on camels and the family on camels. They load up and they head out. They ain't telling Laban anything. Because last time he tried to leave, it got him 6 years worth of work that was hell, right? Where his wages were continually changed. And he doesn't want to sign up for that again, so he's like, you know what, I think we'll just head on out. Everybody's mad at Laban, let's go. And, you know, there may be more to it that he fears for his life. Laban's sons have expressed their displeasure, and the feeling that they have is that Jacob is taking away the livelihood of Laban. And Laban doesn't like him at this point either. So, I mean, you can kind of see why he's trying to just sneak out. But in doing it, it stills the heart of Laban, which is Hebraism for hacks him off. Verse 21. I'm going to scroll down at the top. So he fled with all that he had, and he rose up, and he passed over the river. What river would that be? Huh? The Euphrates. It's on the screen. Look at the screen. You see that he's in Haran. He heads out, and the first river he would come to is what? The Euphrates River. And so it says that he passed over the river, watch, and he set his face toward the Mount Gilead, or Gilead. We say Gilead, Gilead. Okay, so he gets across, and he looks across the desert and sets his face towards this mountain range right here, which is 300 miles away. So he can't necessarily see it, but he knows, because he's traveled that direction, where he's headed, back to the land of Canaan. Just to give you a better visual, okay, he crosses the river, and he's looking down here at this area, this mountain range that is in modern-day Jordan, on the east side of the Jordan River, and it is in between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. So let's look at another map here that we can zone in on. And we can see the Sea of Galilee, the Dead Sea, this mountain range right here is the mountain range that is mentioned. So he sets his face towards Mount Gilead, and this is anachronistic because we don't know this mountain yet. This story is actually going to give us the name of this mountain, okay? But the narrator drops the name ahead. And it was told Laban on the third day that Jacob was fled. So he's 3 days' journey across the desert there on his way to the land of Canaan before Laban catches word. Watch this. Verse 23. And he took his brethren with him, and he pursued after him 7 days' journey. And they overtook him in the Mount Gilead. You know what that just told us? That Jacob and his herd and his family traveled 300 miles in 10 days, if we are to take this literal. Probably not likely. That's 30 miles a day on foot in tough conditions. So this is probably a round number that's given here, which, imagine that, 3 and 7. right? Recurring numbers in the Bible. But nonetheless, they overtake him by the time he gets to the location of what becomes the Gilead Mountains. Verse 24. And God, Elohim, came to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night and said unto him, Take heed that you speak not to Jacob either good or bad. So God comes to him, warns him. Why would he warn him? Because you know Laban is fighting mad. And God comes to him and tells him, don't you speak good or bad. Then Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the mount, and Laban with his brethren pitched in the mount of Gilead. The whole mountain range is Mount Gilead, so thanks for the detail, right? So he's overtaken him. And verse 26 says, Laban said to Jacob, What have you done? You have stolen away unaware, you have stolen my heart, and carried away my daughters as captives, taken with the sword. I think that's probably safe to say that's hyperbole, because he probably didn't take them at sword point. Wherefore did you flee away secretly and steal away from me, and did not tell me, that I might have sent you away with mirth and with songs, with tabret and with harp? I'm not so sure I believe you, Laban. I'm not so sure. So you could come up with some other plan, some other con to keep them there. But nonetheless, that's what he says. He goes on to say in verse 28, And hast not suffered me to kiss my sons and my daughters. Thou hast now done foolishly in so doing. So he's accusing him now. Is it in the power of my hand? It is in the power of my hand to do you hurt. But the God of your father spake unto me yesternight, saying, notice he doesn't say my God. Why? Because Laban is not a monotheist. He's a polytheist. He's a worshiper of many gods. But he acknowledges that the God of your father spake unto me last night, saying, Take thou heed that you speak not to Jacob either good or bad. And now, though you would needs be gone, and literally in Hebrew it says, though in going you have gone, because you sore longed after your father's house, or longing you have longed for your father's house, yet wherefore hast thou stolen my gods? Why don't you just jump all over the place, Laban, right? He's just jumping from one thing to the other. Positive, negative, positive, fury, anger, consolation. And then at the end of it, he's like, why have you stolen my gods? What gods is he talking about? The little teraphim that Rachel has stolen. Little figurines. I was talking to Amy about this earlier. The deities that were worshipped in the ancient Near East, a lot of times are referred to as the host of heaven or the stars of heaven, right? That's what they're called. And of those stars, they worshiped them by creating figurines of them. We don't do that in our culture, do we? Do you think idolatry was a big red flashing sign in their culture that said, I'm weird, I have idols? It was the norm. It was the norm. In our culture, we do the same thing. We have people that we put up on pedestals, and we ironically call them stars. and we practically worship them and try to be like them and try to mimic them. And they're the ones in society who nobody cares if they get millions or billions of dollars. We'll continue to support their idolatry and idolize them and try to be like them. And I was thinking back at my childhood. I used to be a sports fanatic, and I still like to watch sports. But I remember I used to collect baseball, football cards, figurines, and all kinds of stuff of all these, what are they called? Stars. It's normal for our culture. Nothing wrong with it, right? Do you think they said the same thing in their day? Of course they did. So it's our heart attitude, our heart posture in those things. And I was allowed to be a fanatical collector of sports paraphernalia and things. Needless to say, if I had a child, I wouldn't let them do that today. So, history repeats itself. Don't let the subtle idolatry in our culture be tolerated or allowed in your home. Because American homes are inundated with idolatry in subtle forms, accepted forms, normal forms. But it doesn't make it right, and it doesn't justify it. Y'all didn't see that one coming, did you? I'm speaking from something I've been guilty of myself. Sports was an idol to me as a child. You know why? Because I found my self-worth in it. And I have friends that did the same thing. And when sports was taken away, their self-worth was taken away. And their life went down a spiral into a dead-end road that ended in suicide. So please, do not encourage your children and your grandchildren to chase after things that are idolatry in the eyes of God. To be a part of, to learn from, yes, but to make it our world is idolatry. Anything that we think on more than God is an idol. Whether it's our job, our family, whatever it is, anything that takes our heart away from God and honoring Him first and foremost is an idol. You know why it's important to understand that? There will be zero idolaters in heaven. Zero. Okay? So it's very important. So, I don't know who that was for, but we need to move on. Verse 30, he says, "You have stolen my gods." Well, Jacob doesn't know that. So Jacob answered and said to Laban, "Because I was afraid. That's why I left. For I said, perhaps you would take by force your daughters from me." And then he says in verse 32, in response to stealing the gods, "With whomsoever you find your gods, let him not live." Remember that. Remember that. Remember, she stole them gods because she thought they had supernatural health-preserving powers. So she took them with her. Jacob didn't know, which also shows us that we need to choose our words wisely. Because to defend him, and we don't need to be so quick to want to defend ourselves either. In him being quick to defend himself, he makes this oath, well, whoever has these gods you're talking about, let them die. He says, let him not live. Before our brethren, discern thou what is thine with me, and take it to thee. And the narrator inserts this, for Jacob knew not that Rachel had stolen them. Would he have said that if he had known? Absolutely not. And Laban went into Jacob's tent, and into Leah's tent, and into the two maidservants' tents, but he found them not. Then went he out of Leah's tent and entered into Rachel's tent. So he's going from tent to tent. He is adamant. He wants to find them, which shows the held belief that they carried supernatural healing powers. Verse 34, now Rachel had taken the teraphim and put them in the camel's furniture. I have no idea why they put furniture, but it's a saddlebag. And sat upon them. She's learned a little bit from all these guys she's hanging around, huh? How to get away with stuff. So she puts them in the saddlebag and she's sitting on them. And Laban searched all the tent. Literally, the word search is he groped. He felt profusively all the tent, but found them not. And she said to her father, let it not displease my Lord that I cannot rise up before you. For the custom of women, or the way of women, is upon me. What is she talking about? She's on her period. She's on her menstrual cycle. So she's basically saying, forgive me, Daddy, I can't get off the camel because I'm setting on the gods that I stole. But it's that time of the month, Dad. I can't get off, right? And he searched, but found not the images. Well, of course he didn't, because she's setting on them. Now, while all this is going on, he's running around like a madman, groping everything. And he finds nothing because Rachel has them hidden underneath herself and she's not going to move. So verse 36 says, Jacob was wroth and fought with Laban. And Jacob answered and said unto Laban, what is my trespass? What is my sin that you have so hotly pursued after me? Jacob's had enough. 20 years of keeping his mouth shut has come to an end. Verse 37, whereas you have groped all my stuff, what have you found of all your household stuff? Set it here before my brethren, that they may judge between us. This 20 years have I been with you. Thy ewes and thy she-goats have not cast their young, and the rams of your flock have I not eaten. Verse 39, that which was torn of beast, I brought it not unto you. I bear the loss of it. Of my hand did you require it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. Thus I was in the day, the drought consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep departed from my eyes. Thus have I been 20 years in your house. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your herds, and you have changed my wages 10 times. Reckon he's reached a bowling point? He's hacked. And he has somewhat of a right to be upset. He says, except the God of my father, the God of Abraham and the fear of Isaac had been with me, surely you had sent me away now empty. God hath seen my affliction and the labor of my hands, and rebuked you yesternight. So he just goes off on him, don't he? He goes off on this tangent. I'm sure there's more said than what the narrator includes too. Verse 43, and Laban answered and said unto Jacob, these daughters are my daughters, and these children are my children. These flocks are my flocks, and all that you see is mine. And what can I do this day unto these my daughters, or unto their children which they have borne? What a response. This is all my stuff. Now therefore come thou, let us make a covenant, I and you, and let it be for a witness between me and you. And Jacob took a stone and set it for a pillar, You know what's amazing is how many of the same words are in this story and in the story where he fled from Esau on his way to Haran. Remember at Bethel he set up a pillar? He had the encounter with God and he set up a pillar there, which was just across the Jordan River, not that far away, ironically. So he said, let's cut covenant. And Jacob took a stone, set it up for a pillar, verse 45, verse 46. And Jacob said unto his brethren, gather stones. Remember, stones was in that story as well because he put stones around his head as like a pillow. And they took stones and made a heap. Go. And they did eat there upon the heap. Now the word heap is the Hebrew word gal, which means round. So they heap these stones, they eat together. Now watch what happens in verse 47. And Laban called it Yegar Sahaduta, which is Aramaic. But Jacob called it Gal-Aid. Gal, heap, aid, witness. A heap of witness. Yegar Sahaduta means the exact same thing. It's just Aramaic, which is very similar to Hebrew. So you have Laban speaking an Aramaic name of this place, and you have Jacob calling it Galaad, which becomes the name of this mountain range, Gilead, which in English is translated into Gilead, but in Hebrew it's Galaad. So they both name it. Now, why the difference? Because remember, Abraham, Sarah, all come from this same family that Laban comes from, right? So how come Abraham and his offspring speak Hebrew and Laban speaks Aramaic? This is an instance where I would agree with some of the Jewish Midrash, and the Jewish Midrash saying this, that Abraham lived prior to the Tower of Babel incident. That happened about 40 years into his life, of which he lived with Noah and Shem. That's what Jewish Midrash says, that he lived with Noah and Shem. So it's possible that he could have learned Hebrew, if Hebrew is the original language, the mother tongue, before the Tower of Babel, that he learned Hebrew from Abraham and Shem, and then, was conversational in Aramaic as well, because of the ultimate settling of his family. I find that very plausible. Very much plausible. Matter of fact, I believe it. And I believe that's why we have the difference in the dialects here. Verse 48. And Laban said, this heap is a witness between me and you this day. Therefore was the name of it called Galaad. Obviously, this is the Hebrew name. And Mitzpah. For he said, Yahweh watch between me and you when we are absent one from another. This is Laban speaking. If you shall afflict my daughters, or if you shall take other wives besides my daughters, no man is with us. See, God is witness between me and you. Time out here, dude. So you want to erect a heap of stones as a witness and as a mitzvah, as a watching over of which he would have attributed to the gods, plural, that if he afflicts Laban's daughters, which happen to be his wives, or if he marries other women, you're the reason why he's a polygamous dude. I mean, you caused him to be a polygamist. Now you're demanding that he refrain from it? Don't marry anyone else? It just seems pretty demanding and very selfish. But nonetheless, that's the purpose. And so you have two names, Mitzpah and Galeed. And we'll see those later on throughout the history of Israel, because these names stick. Verse 51, and Laban said to Jacob, behold this heap, and behold this pillar. So you have a heap and a pillar, which are what? Two witnesses. Because you have this principle of old, let every word be established in the presence of two or three witnesses. So they have two representations here. This heap be a witness, and this pillar be witness, that I will not pass over this heap to do thee, and that you shall not pass over this heap and this pillar unto me for harm or for evil. Verse 53, the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us. This is Laban saying this, so he's swearing by the God of Abraham, the God of Nahor, the God of their father, which we're not all one and the same. Because remember, Abraham was called to leave his family because they were idol worshipers, in part. So he's just swearing by all the gods, just in case he mistreats his daughters. Then Jacob offered sacrifice upon the mount, called his brethren to eat bread, and they did eat bread and tarried all night in the mount. In verse 55, and early in the morning Laban rose up and kissed his sons and his daughters and blessed them, and Laban departed and returned unto his place. Now what's interesting, I'm going to highlight this, is verse 55. Hold on here. Could y'all do this at the same time? It may crash on me. Verse 55 in our English version and chapter 32 and verse 1 are the same verse, but the chapter break is in a different place. So next week we'll back up and read verse 55 because it kind of sets us up for what we read in chapter 32. But that's going to bring us to a close for what we're going to read tonight. And from here moving forward, we're going to see the continuation of the promise on Jacob's life. And we'll see how that unfolds and what else befalls him moving forward. But we're going to give you an opportunity at this time, if you have any questions, to go ahead and ask. Yes, when you see the word sons or daughters in the Old Testament, it can refer to literal sons or daughters or offsprings of male or female, grandsons, nephews, etc., of either camp. Relation, essentially. No, it's not the same root. He asked if Teraphim was the same root as Terah, as Abraham's father, Terach. No, Terach or Teraph, or Rapha is actually the root of Teraphim. The T word, the T sound, Teraphim, the T is added to certain consonantal words. We're going to get real technical here. Certain consonantal words to make a noun out of it. Usually you have a mem, the letter mem, like mitzvah is added to the front of a word to make it a noun, but it depends on the consonant, because this word, the root word, starts with the letter resh. It starts with the T sound, a tav. So it's not related at all. But it is related to the root word rapha, which means to heal or to recover. And it's the same root that is in Rephaim, which is the giant clan, the offspring of the divine sons of God and the human beings. Now, which is amazing, because what did we learn in Enoch that the Watchers taught humans? The practice of sorcery and medicine. Pharmakeia.
Do we know why Rachel would have tried to take him? Did it have to be her being barren at one point?
I believe that he asked why Rachel would have taken them. I believe that Rachel took them because she knew she was leaving her father's house, and she had lived under what she felt like was the blessing or the promise of guaranteed health, because she lived there. Now that she's leaving, she wants to take that security blanket, so to speak, with her, that guarantee, because she believed that there was a supernatural divinational power in these figurines, because they believed in antiquity that these figurines at points would house the presence of the deity, and there was a supernatural power connected to that, which is actually true. There were actually supernatural phenomena that actually occurred through these type of things in antiquity. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. When Moses was getting the law, and they talked Aaron into making a golden calf, they made the calf so that Yahweh would inhabit or indwell that calf and manifest to them, because Moses is off on this mountain. We don't know what's happened to him. So let's just make a idol for the God to come and inhabit and manifest himself through. And that's what they believed. And we have evidence that it actually happened at different points. Rick?
So she had that idol in her household, right? She didn't come to her father and get that and steal it. Is that correct? So it was all along was in the household?
It doesn't exactly say where the items were located. We would assume they would have had to have been in his tent, because he noticed right away somehow. And you would assume that they would have packed up their tents when they left. It doesn't say, so a lot of it we have to guess. But wherever they were in a location that was easy for him to see, whether they were with her or him. And so he noticed them, and he noticed they were missing. And evidently, he's probably the one who taught them to make this connection of guaranteed health, or because of these idols, and she adhered to that belief. Gary?
Does that verse in itself, verse 19, I think it was, the way that was written, when you read it, I thought it was so strange, because it's like two completely different. I mean, it tells us one thing, that he's gone out to shear a sheep, and then randomly, and Rachel stole the images that were her father. Is there more to all of that?
I believe it's just stating how it was possible for her to steal.
While he was away. Okay.
Yeah, because he's not going to let her take them, because when he finds them, he's hacked off, they're gone. So it's something that he wasn't willing to part with. It wasn't something that she would have been, Dad, can I have your teraphim? So when he goes to shear his sheep, she takes the opportunity to grab them. Amy?
So it's very clear that Tira's idol worship came through some of his children. I'm just curious why they would feel that God would send them back to marry
I believe that part of the reason why Abraham and his offspring married back into their relation is due to the fact that they knew that they were not intermingled with the offspring of the watchers. Because a lot of the Canaanite tribes had, which is why they're ultimately destroyed by Israel after the Exodus. And the text doesn't come out and say why, but I believe that it was necessary to preserve a pure lineage that was not intermingled by another divine source, to preserve a pure line of human beings. Because what is the whole point and preservation of this ethnic group of people called the Israelites? To bring forth the Messiah. And so I believe that has a lot to do with it.
Was the intermingling that widespread then? I'm guessing so.
The intermingling of the watchers was very widespread surrounding the land of Canaan. Imagine that. The enemy knew where God would bring his people and where he would place his name and where he would build his temple. Which goes back to what I proposed earlier on, that this was the location of the garden that was in Eden, because we know that Adam and Eve left the garden eastward, and a city has been found right here called the city of Adam, which is east of Jerusalem and the land that is Canaan or Israel. And so I believe that's where the garden originally was. And I mean, think about it. In light of Bible prophecy, in light of all the promises that were made to Abraham, every one of the promises are connected to this land. When Jesus comes back, where's he coming? New York? No. Canaan, the promised land. So everything's connected to that land. I mean, you think the enemy knew that? Of course. Of course they did. And I believe that the enemy surrounded the land, and there were inhabitants in the land of Canaan that were giants. Why? To put fear and terror in the hearts of the Israelites, who would eventually be taken there. And guess what? It worked. There was a whole generation that died in the wilderness because they were afraid to go in and fight the giants, which is why I believe the punishment for their unbelief was so harsh from God, because it was the enemy's opportunity to taunt in God's face, saying, looky here, my offspring is terrifying your offspring, your children, the chosen, the elect, Abraham's descendants. Ha ha ha. And I think God said, well, we're going to toughen some up and we'll bring another generation. This generation ain't going to do it, but there's a generation that will. And so clearly that was strategic of the enemy, the watchers, to have them surrounding that land.
So whenever he's talking about when God came to him in a dream, and you said something about it being 6 years after his work, could you relate that to a type of salvation as to God coming in to him and seeing the unfairness of how he's being treated, with what's been happening to him, taking him out of that situation after 6 years?
Yeah, I mean, you can see, I don't know if the number necessarily is equivalent to anything in particular, but certainly there is a time of vindication here, and the time of vindication is synonymous with a type of salvation. He gets to leave finally. I see those connections, but beyond that, I don't really see anything. Gary?
I believe it's in verse 29. If I remember correctly, going through it, God came to him in a dream and specifically told him not to say something to Jacob, correct? And then he turns around and does it, but yet there's no mention of. I mean, it was just like he was disobeying the Lord, and he got away with it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I mean, he comes and he says, "Speak not to Jacob, either good or bad," which, I mean, given his anger, he probably did the best he could. This is not a person who's indwelled by the Holy Spirit, and the fruit of the Spirit's working through him. So, simply a God in his mind has showed up. The God of your fathers, he showed up last night and, told me not to speak to you good or bad. So I'm trying. But, you get in the heat of a discussion where there's tension over at least 6 years, maybe more. It's hard to control your tongue. As James 3 says, that the tongue is an unruly member. And
Right.
it's a deadly thing. And, I mean, it's not uncommon that people can't control their tongue.
Sure, I was just more interested in the disobedience and the non-judgment of that because he wasn't following.
Well, we'll see from here forward. Laban fades off in the distance because he's not a main character.
Right.
Laban he's just a thing of the past. He's a memory from here forward. So, we don't know what become of him, but I have a good feeling it wasn't positive. But, I don't want to be too judgmental or critical because we don't know. We don't know what happened of him.
And Jacob told Laban that whoever took the idol would die. It goes to show the power of your words.
Definitely, if you carry the favor of God on your life, you need to be careful what you say. There is power in our words. Dylan?
Verse 42, it says that he refers to the God of Abraham and the fear of Isaac. Why would he word it like that? What's the point of that?
A lot of times the fear of the Lord is linked to the worship of the Lord. Honestly, you can conclude from just the evidence of the overall view of the Bible that one cannot say they worship the Lord without the fear of the Lord, because fear of the Lord is really entrance into relationship with God. And so him wording that would be alluding to the fear that Isaac had for the Lord, which obviously was passed down from Abraham generationally. And they would have seen some level of that. Obviously, they're not perfect people, but they did fear God, and they did honor him and worship him. And part of worshiping God is fearing him. I've told you guys before, I only engage in pulpit ministry because that's what God has told me I am to do. And if I didn't think that my salvation was tied to that, I would have quit, undoubtedly, a long time ago. But disobedient, willful, habitual disobedience will not be tolerated from God. When we know and we just stick our face to the wall, set our face against him and say, I'm going to do what I want to do, that's rebellion. And God won't overlook it. So the fear of the Lord, I need to preach a message on that because it's something that our culture certainly doesn't get. And because Jesus comes on the scene and brings this concept of God as a father figure, that has been misappropriated a lot and really convoluted in a lot of ways. And it said because he's a father, he would never abandon his children. There's a lot of parallels that are drawn. But we have to look at the whole counsel of the attributes of God. Jesus was simply bringing an attribute of God that had been overlooked and undervalued. That doesn't mean we throw away all of the other attributes of the reality that he's God. And so the fear of the Lord is something that was essential to the patriarchs, essential throughout the Old Testament into the New Testament. The fear of the Lord was a powerful thing, and it's something we need restored.
I found it interesting that Laban
he recognized God because in antiquity, the reason why they worshiped many gods is many gods appeared. So they didn't know which one to worship. And when you have multiple gods appearing to you, some of them lying because they're evil beings in rebellion and defiance against God, like Satan, the adversary, it would bring confusion. How do you know that this God over here who appeared, who calls himself Yahweh, is their creator God? Prove it. How can you prove it? Ready for the answer? You can't. You can't prove that Yahweh is the creator.
To somebody else. I can't prove it to somebody.
Can you prove it to me? No. It's called faith.
To me.
It's called faith. I mean, we know and we believe that, but we can't prove it because, that's what faith is all about. So, we have to cut them a little slack because in contrast to how the world works today, you have these divine encounters. This is not myth. This is not make-believe. They didn't just scribble stuff with a chisel on stone of these beings they claimed came and visited them because they were bored. That's a lot of work to do for something that you didn't believe in. They believed it. And the power of these gods were real. The Exodus story is clear examples. The magicians were able to mimic the first couple of plagues that Moses did. He threw his rod down. They threw their rod down. There was supernatural power that they had through these deities. These watchers came down, visited them, procreated. They had encounters, divine encounters. God has primarily chosen for the past 2,000 years to speak through the authority of His Word and not so much through divine visitations, although we can't say they don't happen because they do. But it's not normal. Does anyone personally know someone who visibly seen Yahweh come to them and say, "Hey, I'm Yahweh"? No. So their world was different. They had more extraterrestrial interaction, and it would have been easy for them too. We're no different. We don't worship actual beings, but we worship idols. America is the most idolatrous nation probably there is right now. We don't worship deities or beings. But how about what Paul says? Greed is idolatry. America is inflicted with greed. Trusting in money, trusting in the arm of the flesh is idolatry. So, it was common in their day. Next question.
Why did Laban think the only thing he could do was make a covenant? Why come he didn't give Jacob a wedding gift?
He was pretty upset, so he wouldn't have wanted to give him a going away present, which contradicts his statement. If you would have told me, I would have gave you myrrh and a party and dancing and singing. He was just saying that because he was upset. He wanted to preserve his own well-being, I think. There was an element of that because part of the covenant was, you're not going to pass this stone to do me harm, and I won't pass this stone to do you harm. So it was kind of, you know what, let's part ways and be on with our lives. And that's fortunately what happened. Any other questions? Okay, we're going to stop.